The officer told me what my brother-in-law said when they brought him in for questioning. He said he had every right to ask my 9-year-old daughter to leave the property. He said she had stolen from his home, and he wasn't going to stand there and be accused of wrongdoing for protecting his family. He said it like that, his family. My daughter, his property, my child standing outside in a January night in northern Ontario in -22 in her socks. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not someone who falls apart easily. I spent 6 years as a registered nurse in the emergency department at a level 1 trauma center. I have held the hands of people dying and kept my voice level. I have talked to grieving parents in the middle of the night and not let my face crack until I got to my car in the parking garage. I know how to separate what I feel from what I need to do. That training, that version of me, is the only reason the next 14 months went the way they did instead of the way my mother-in-law probably expected. But I'll be honest with you. The night I got that phone call, I sat in the hospital parking lot for a full hour before I could drive. My hands were shaking too hard. My name is Celeste. I was 31 years old when this started, and I had been married to my husband Kevin for 4 years. Kevin and I met during our undergrad at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay. He was studying business, I was in nursing, and we fell in love over bad coffee in the campus library during a January storm that shut the whole city down for 3 days. He was the kind of person who made everything feel quieter. I needed that. I had grown up in a house full of noise, my own parents' marriage was loud and exhausting, and Kevin was steady and calm. His family was another matter. Kevin's mother, whom I will call by her role because that is all she ever felt like to me, my mother-in-law, ran her household the way some people run small corporations. She had 2 sons, Kevin, who was the younger, and his brother, whom I'll call my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law had married a woman I'll call my sister-in-law, and the 2 of them lived 30 minutes from my mother-in-law's property in Sudbury, which was a large house on a few acres that her late husband had left behind. My mother-in-law had grown up with money, married more of it, and treated the people around her according to how much of it they had, or were likely to inherit. Kevin never talked about it directly. He softened everything. He'd say, "My mom just has strong opinions," or "She means well, she just doesn't always show it." I believed him for longer than I should have. Love does that. You hear what you want to hear, especially when you're young, and you think that being patient and kind and non-confrontational is the same thing as being mature. My daughter Hazel was born 22 months into our marriage. She was, from the beginning, the most important thing in my world. She had Kevin's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that could fill a room. She was also, from the moment she arrived, a source of tension with Kevin's family. My mother-in-law had wanted Kevin to marry someone from her particular social circle. She had someone in mind, a daughter of one of her friends, a woman I had never met and had no reason to think about, except that my mother-in-law brought her up with suspicious regularity. I was not from that circle. My parents were from Kapuskasing. My father drove a lumber truck. My mother worked at the hospital laundry until her knees gave out. We were not the kind of people who got invited to my mother-in-law's dinner parties, but Kevin chose me. And my mother-in-law, to her credit, never said anything directly cruel. She was too smart for that. She operated in subtext. Compliments that weren't quite compliments. Questions that weren't quite questions. "You look tired, Celeste. Is everything all right at the hospital?" The way she'd ask Kevin about his childhood friends right in front of me, lingering on names, on memories I wasn't part of. The way she'd address Hazel and sort of talk around me like I was a temporary fixture in the room. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law were more obvious about it. They had 2 kids of their own, a boy and a girl, both older than Hazel, and the way they treated their children versus the way they treated mine was not something I could explain away or chalk up to misunderstanding. Their kids got attention and engagement. Hazel got politeness. Cold, formal, adequate politeness. Kevin saw some of it, not all of it. He was working long hours building his career at a logistics company in Sudbury, and I was on rotating 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and when you're living like that, you don't always have the bandwidth to name every uncomfortable thing. You get through the week, and you try to make the weekends count. The arrangement we had for Hazel's care was a patchwork of daycare, a neighbor who babysat 3 afternoons a week, and occasionally, Kevin's family. I was reluctant about the family part, but I didn't have proof of anything I could point to. Just a feeling. A persistent, low-level unease that I told myself was anxiety, not instinct. I wish I had listened to myself sooner. The December that Hazel was 9, Kevin had a work trip to Calgary. 4 days. I was scheduled to work 3 of those 4 nights. My regular babysitter had a family emergency and couldn't cover. The daycare was closed for a staff training day on the Thursday. We went through every option. Kevin suggested his mother's place. I said I was uncomfortable. He reminded me that Hazel had stayed there before without incident. He promised he'd call every night. He promised it would be fine. I said yes. I should not have said yes, but I did. Hazel arrived at her grandmother's house on a Wednesday afternoon with her overnight bag and her backpack and her stuffed rabbit that she'd had since she was 2. Kevin dropped her off on his way to the airport. I worked Wednesday night. I worked Thursday night. I called Hazel both evenings at 7 and she sounded normal. A little bored, a little quiet, the way kids get when they're somewhere unfamiliar. My mother-in-law was pleasant on the phone. Everything seemed fine. Thursday night, after my shift, I drove home and slept. At 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law arrived at my mother-in-law's house unexpectedly. I pieced this together later from multiple sources, including a statement from a neighbor, security footage from the house's own system that my mother-in-law's lawyer eventually had to disclose, and Hazel's own account. What happened, as far as I can reconstruct it, is this. My brother-in-law accused Hazel of stealing his daughter's bracelet. The bracelet was a gold chain with a small amethyst pendant that my sister-in-law claimed went missing from the overnight bag their daughter had brought to a visit the previous month. There was no evidence, there was no investigation, there was just my brother-in-law's certainty and my mother-in-law's silence. Hazel, who was 9 years old and had been asleep when they arrived, was woken up and questioned in the kitchen. She cried and said she hadn't taken anything. Nobody believed her. Or nobody said they believed her. My mother-in-law stood by the counter and did not intervene. My brother-in-law told Hazel she needed to leave because he was not going to allow a thief in his mother's home. It was -22 outside. The wind chill brought it to -31. He walked my 9-year-old daughter to the front door. She had her pajamas on. He let her take her coat. I learned later he at least did that, but in the confusion she left her boots by the door and went outside in her socks. He closed the door behind her. She was outside for 47 minutes. A neighbor, a retired teacher who lived 2 properties over and was letting her dog out before bed, found Hazel sitting on the edge of the driveway with her arms wrapped around her knees. She had tried to get back inside and the door had been locked. She had knocked and nobody answered. The neighbor brought her in, called 911, and then called the non-emergency police line, and then, through the number I had put on a laminated card in Hazel's backpack, called me. I was asleep when my phone rang. I was asleep and the phone rang and I heard the words "your daughter" and "hospital" and "hypothermia," and I don't remember the drive there. I genuinely do not. I was at the hospital before I was aware of having left the house. Hazel was treated for mild to moderate hypothermia and frostbite on 3 toes of her left foot. She was pale and exhausted and still crying a little when I got to her. I held her for a long time without saying anything. A nurse I didn't know came and changed the warming blanket and very carefully didn't make eye contact with me. I appreciated that. Kevin called at 1 in the morning. I told him very quietly what had happened. He was on a flight back within the hour. He didn't sleep on the plane. I know this because he told me later, and because when he walked into the hospital room at 6 in the morning and saw Hazel with her foot wrapped and her face still pale, he started to cry in a way I had never seen him cry before. My mother-in-law arrived at the hospital at 7. She stood in the doorway of Hazel's room, and she said that she wanted to explain. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said my brother-in-law had been upset and had reacted badly, and she should have intervened, and she was sorry. She said it the way people say things when they have calculated what the minimum necessary apology sounds like. I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I said, "You need to leave this room." She left. Kevin's relationship with his family broke in the next 48 hours in ways I don't think any of them fully understand even now. He called his mother from the hospital parking lot. I wasn't there for the call, but he told me about it afterward. He told me she spent most of the call explaining why his brother had been concerned about the bracelet. Kevin told her that she had let a child be locked outside in -30 weather, and that the reason for it did not matter, and that he was done. He was. I believed him. But I also knew that being done with his family emotionally was different from being done with them on paper. And that distinction mattered enormously for what came next. Here is what my mother-in-law did not know about me. She did not know that I had 2 years earlier been asked to join the nursing union's provincial advocacy committee. She did not know that through that committee I had worked closely with a health policy lawyer named Adrian, who had since become a friend. She did not know that Adrian, when I called her from the hospital parking lot at 8 in the morning, immediately said, "Celeste, this is criminal negligence of a child. We are going to document everything." She did not know that I had already, before leaving for the hospital, stopped at my car and taken my phone and voice recorded the entire conversation with the neighbor who found Hazel. She did not know that I had, within 24 hours of Hazel being discharged, filed reports with both the local police and the Children's Aid Society. She did not know that I had kept every text message, every email, every voicemail she had ever sent me, organized by date, in a folder I'd been maintaining for 2 years out of an instinct I couldn't name. She did not know that I knew how to gather evidence while appearing to be simply a mother at her daughter's bedside. The Children's Aid investigation was opened within a week. The police investigation took longer, but it moved. My brother-in-law was charged under the criminal code with criminal negligence causing bodily harm. The charge took several months to lay, but it was laid. My sister-in-law was interviewed multiple times. My mother-in-law was interviewed as a witness to what had occurred in her home that night. During this time, I did something that surprised people who knew me. I went quiet. I did not post about it. I did not talk about it at family gatherings, because I stopped attending family gatherings. I did not call my mother-in-law and yell at her, which I understand some people thought I would do. I went to work. I took Hazel to her therapy appointments. She was seeing a psychologist who specialized in childhood trauma and was doing careful, important work with my daughter. I met with Adrian every 2 weeks. I organized my files. I slept when I could. The bracelet, by the way, was found 2 months later in the lining of my sister-in-law's own daughter's overnight bag, where it had slipped through a torn seam. Their daughter, who was 12, told her school counselor about it. The school counselor was legally obligated to report it. That report made its way into the investigation. My sister-in-law called me when this came out. I did not answer. I let her leave a voicemail. The voicemail contained the words, "We didn't know, and you have to understand how it looked, and we hope we can move past this." I saved it. I added it to my folder. There was a moment, about 8 months in, that I want to tell you about because I think it's the moment that changed how I understood what was really happening. Kevin's family had money in a family trust that had been established by his late father. The trust included provisions for the grandchildren, including Hazel. Kevin was also, under the original terms of the trust, a beneficiary of the estate when my mother-in-law passed. The family had a meeting, without us, and my mother-in-law subsequently had a lawyer contact Kevin to say that given the current family difficulties, she was amending the trust to remove Hazel as a named beneficiary. She did this, I believe, because she thought it would make us go away. She thought money was what mattered to us, and that threatening to take it away would bring Kevin to heel. She thought Kevin was still the younger son who needed her approval. He wasn't. He hadn't been for a long time, but I don't think she'd noticed. We consulted a trusts and estates lawyer in Toronto named Patricia, no relation to anyone in Kevin's family, and Patricia told us that under Ontario law, the amendment could potentially be challenged depending on the circumstances, and that the timing of the amendment, coming directly after Hazel's injury and the pending criminal investigation, was going to look very bad for my mother-in-law in any proceeding. She was right about that. The criminal case against my brother-in-law went to trial. I will not say everything that happened in that courtroom because some of it belongs to Hazel and not to me. What I will say is that the security footage from my mother-in-law's property showed, very clearly, Hazel walking to the front door. It showed the door closing. It showed the lights in the house remaining on. It showed no one going to the door to check on her for 47 minutes. My brother-in-law's defense was that he had not known she was still outside, that he had assumed someone had let her back in. The jury did not find this convincing. He was convicted. He received a conditional sentence with strict probation conditions, significant community service hours, and a permanent criminal record. The conditions of his probation included no unsupervised contact with minors, which effectively ended a volunteer coaching position he had held at his son's hockey association. That part hit him hard, from what Kevin's cousin, one of the few members of the extended family who remained in contact with us, told us. My sister-in-law has not spoken to Kevin since the verdict. My mother-in-law sent a card to Kevin on his birthday, which he did not open. The trust amendment was challenged. Patricia was thorough and relentless. Given the circumstances surrounding the timing of the change and the documented pattern of differential treatment of Hazel compared to the other grandchildren, something that came out in the civil proceedings in a way that surprised the amendment was set aside. Hazel is still a named beneficiary. Not that I care about the money, really. I care about what it means. I care that she is not written out of her own family history. I want to tell you about the day I saw my mother-in-law in the courthouse hallway. I had not spoken to her in almost 11 months. I had seen her across the courtroom during proceedings, and I had looked at her and looked away, because I had learned early in my career that you do not spend energy on what you cannot change in the moment. In the hallway, she approached me. I don't know what she intended to say. She started with, "Celeste, I hope you know that none of this is what I wanted." I waited. She said, "I should have done more that night, I know that, but what this family has had to go through because of." And I stopped her. Quietly. I said, "You had 47 minutes to open a door. You didn't open it." I walked past her and I didn't look back. I've had people ask me since whether I forgave her. I find the question strange, honestly. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the person who hurt you, and I've worked through enough with my own therapist to understand that. But forgiveness doesn't require a relationship. It doesn't require pretending something didn't happen. It doesn't require my daughter to sit across from her grandmother at Christmas dinner and be polite. Hazel is 10 now. She goes to therapy every other week and she's doing well. She started figure skating lessons in September, and she's working on her axle jump, which apparently is harder than it looks. She slept with her rabbit until she was 9 3/4, and then one day she just put it on her shelf, calmly, like she'd decided she was done with that chapter. She doesn't talk about that night much. When she does, she's matter-of-fact about it, which I think is partly her processing and partly just who she is. She said to me once, driving home from her lesson, "Mom, do you think Grandma knew I was outside?" I was quiet for a second. I said, "I think she knew, and I think she didn't do the thing she should have done." Hazel was quiet too, then she said, "That's really sad," and she meant it. She wasn't angry, she was sad, for Grandma, for what it meant about Grandma. I find that the most astonishing thing about my daughter. Not what happened to her, but who she is on the other side of it. Kevin and I bought a house in a neighborhood outside the city last spring. It has a yard with a cedar hedge along the back, and a garden that I'm slowly learning to keep alive. Kevin coaches Hazel's skating practice on Saturday mornings because he learned on a pond in Sudbury, and it turns out he's actually quite good. We have dinner together every night we're both home. We talk about our days. It's a quiet life, we made it quiet on purpose. I think about the version of me that said yes that December, yes to leaving my daughter somewhere I was uneasy about, and I understand why she made that choice, and I don't punish her for it. She was tired and stretched thin, and she trusted the wrong people because she needed to trust someone. That's a human thing. That's not a failure. But I also think about the version of me who sat in the hospital parking lot at 8 in the morning, on no sleep, and called Adrian and said, "I need to know every option I have." That version of me knew something important, that being someone's mother means you do not let the story end with your child in the cold. The last time my mother-in-law's name came up in our house, Hazel was doing a school project on family history. She asked me if she needed to include her grandmother's side. I said she could include whoever felt like family to her. She thought about it. She wrote about Kevin's cousin, who sends her a birthday card every year with a Tim Hortons gift card tucked inside. She wrote about my parents in Kapuskasing, who video call every Sunday and never miss it. She wrote about our neighbor, who brings us butter tarts at Christmas because she knows I grew up eating them. She did not write about her grandmother. She turned the project in and got a good grade and came home and told me about it at dinner, and then moved on to asking Kevin about the axle jump, and that was that. Some doors, once they've been closed on you, you eventually stop trying to open, not because you've given up, because you've found somewhere warmer to be.